Hey, you guys, we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today. Kim Abbott, represent House District 83 here in Helena. And as you know, we just welcomed newly elected caucus members for the first time and had caucus leadership, and wanted to just take a minute to introduce y'all to the leadership in both the Dems in the House and the Dems in the Senate, take you through some of our priorities and our vision for putting Montana's money to work for working class families, and talk a little bit about our expectations for the session. So first, I was reelected as House Minority Leader for this term. I'm thrilled to do it and honored to do it again. Our team is incredibly diverse and talented, and I'm excited to get to work this session. But I did want to introduce our whips and our caucus chair on the House side before Pat goes through his team. So we have Derek Harvey, who's a firefighter from Butte, coming back as a minority whip. Super excited to have him back. We've got Tyson Running Wolf, who's an outfitter from Browning, coming back as whip again. We have Katie Sullivan, who is an intellectual property attorney from Missoula, who works for small businesses and entrepreneurs, coming into the leadership team for the first time as a whip. And we have Alice Buckley, who's a consultant and facilitator from Bozeman, coming in as caucus chair. So really, really excited about this team, really, really excited about our caucus, and really excited to get to work for our communities and for Montana. And with that, I'll introduce newly elected Senate Minority Leader, Pat Flowers.
Thanks, Kim. I know this looks daunting. It's really not as long as it appears opening this. First, let me say I am very honored to be the minority leader for the Senate Dem Caucus. I think likewise, similar to Kim's comments, I think we've got a really strong team, really diverse, a lot of experience coming over from the House. So we're excited to get started. And I'm also excited about the other members of our leadership team. First, I want to introduce Senator Susan Weber. Susan was elected to our caucus to serve as one of our whips. Susan is an educator, author, and tribal historian. She hails from Browning. She's served multiple terms in the House and was recently reelected into the second term in the Senate. So we're thrilled to have Susan as part of our leadership team. Our second whip is Senator Shannon O'Brien from Missoula. Shannon also serves or has worked as a teacher, significant experience in education administration policy. She's in her first term in the Senate, and she brings a wealth of enthusiasm and experience, so we're so thrilled to have her part of the team. Talk a bit about our platform. As many of you know, and I certainly know because I knocked a lot of doors, Montanans have had a tough couple of years. So many people I talked to were struggling to afford housing. They're worried about paying their bills, worried about finding employees for their business, and making sure their kids are doing okay in school. It's been a tough couple of years on kids and education. In a nutshell, so much has changed over the last 2 or 3 years in Montana that there's just a lot of people struggling. And they're just trying to figure out how to survive here, how to adjust their lives to this new world and this, to a certain degree, in places like Bozeman, Missoula, Helena, really a new economy. At the same time, we're going to be starting this session with about $2 billion in the bank, so to speak, above and beyond what we need for our current budget. We think that presents some opportunities for working Montanans. Over this session, our biggest priority will be expanding the supply of housing that working folks can afford. We'll be pushing for serious investments into building more apartments and houses, bringing down rents, and relieving the burden of unaffordable property taxes. We'll also be working on opening up our child care system so that it's accessible to every family that needs it. I'm sure we all know young families that are struggling to find child care. By expanding those child care options, we'll address some of the child care deserts that we're currently experiencing in the state and hopefully reducing families' out-of-pocket costs. Nearly every Montanan has been touched by our broken mental health system, whether it's their child, a friend, or family member, or even themselves. Any Montanan who needs help with their mental health deserves to get that help without breaking the bank, driving long hours, or jumping through unnecessary hoops. Democrats are here to deliver on that promise by reinvesting in our mental health system, to reestablishing a mental health care continuum that can get folks the community-based support that they need. Finally, we have to preserve the best of what Montana has to offer, the things that people of our state love and what brought us here and has kept us here. Things like we want to continue to protect our public access and hopefully expand on that to our amazing public lands. And equally important, to make sure anyone, no matter how much they make, no matter who they are, no matter how wealthy they are, that they have the opportunity to hunt and fish on our public lands and our streams and rivers. That's particularly important to me as a sportsman. Our kids deserve a chance at an education that doesn't just prepare our next generation for a job, but instills in them a love for learning and the ability to be full, productive members of our communities. We will secure their right to a quality, free public education and make sure our schools are prepared to carry that far into the future. We'll take concrete steps to bring down the cost of health care and guarantee reproductive freedom for all Montanans. We'll protect Montana's workers' freedom to organize and advocate for better working conditions and push to make sure they get fair pay for a hard day's work. We'll try and yet again to convince our Republican colleagues to join us in empowering Montana ag producers and enhancing their competitiveness in their marketplace. The last 2 years have seen efforts to block Montanans' right to know what their government is doing, dodging transparency and accountability. We're going to push to hold those in power accountable to the transparency that's required under our Constitution and defend Montanans' right to know and participate in government. One good thing that we are bringing back is the opportunity to participate remotely that was introduced in the last session during the pandemic, and we think that really expands the opportunity for Montanans to participate in their government. Most critically, we'll further advance the cause of ending the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people, which we've tried to address in previous sessions as well. We have the resources, we have the vision to make Montana a place where everyday folks can live and thrive. Now we just need the political will. That will exists on our side of the aisle, and we hope it exists on the other side as well. And with that, I'll hand it back to Kim. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I mean, I think that was a good outline of what our priorities are. Obviously, we know we're about 32% of the legislature, and so we need Republicans to join us in these solutions. We saw in election results how much Montanans care about our right to privacy, the individual liberties that our Constitution protects and enshrines, and this caucus and the caucus on the Senate side are going to show up every day to protect those rights, to protect those liberties that are fundamental and that we saw Montanans support this last election cycle. We hear a lot about cost of living, and we hear a lot about inflation and a lot of blaming. But there is no better example of cost of living trouble than housing. And affordable housing isn't available in many of our communities. It's one of the biggest workforce issues. It's one of the biggest drags on our economy right now. We have solutions. We rolled some of them out in July. We'll roll more of them out over the next month. But the bottom line is we need Republicans to get off the bench, stop talking in this myopic way about only regulations, and start talking about an approach that will actually increase supply, that will actually meet the needs of our community, and make sure that our workforce can live in the communities they love and they work in. We're going to be there for that. Abortion was a big topic this last election cycle, and we saw Montanans, a majority of them, stand up and protect the right to privacy that includes the right to abortion, and we're going to be in this building every day making sure that we're protecting that right for our constituents. We hope that Republicans look at the results of that election and realize that Montanans support our right to privacy and support our Constitution. We expect a lot of attacks on the independent judiciary, but we saw Montanans stand up for our court this last election too. We saw a majority of Montanans support the court as it is and re-elect two incumbent justices. And so we hope that Republicans take a signal from voters and lay off the independent judiciary and allow it to be the branch of government and allow it to remain a check against the executive and the supermajority of Republicans. You know, we have a tough job in the minority. Our districts are broken, and we have to represent a lot of people that didn't have a fair chance at representation this time because our districts just haven't held up. We're in redistricting process, and we're hopeful that we'll get fair representation. But for now, we have to show up every day and fight for our constituents, fight for our communities, fight for our shared values. And we need Republicans to join us on that. If we're going to deliver for our communities, we need them to come and help us out. And, you know, we'll see what happens in the House leadership elections and how that relationship works out. But with that, I think we're just going to take your questions now. Aaron.
Speaking of House leadership, so it's going to be Matt here.
I hadn't heard, Aaron.
Yeah, Matt here. A lot of Democrats. I don't know if you were going for Casey. I'm kind of wondering, what your relationship with Representative Greer has been like in the past, what you expect of that in the future.
I guess that remains to be seen. I don't have much of a relationship with Speaker Regier. We served on the audit committee together, so we'll have to see how that plays out.
And what can Republicans do to make sure that the minority has a voice and role in policy making?
I think, obviously, the minority's voice is incredibly important. We represent well over 300,000 Montanans. And so we need to make sure that our members have access to the things they need to deliver for their constituents, to be that voice. And I think we'll work hard for that. And, you know, the responsibility for making sure that 300,000 Montanans have a voice here is really on the Republican Party. Dietrich.
We had a chance to read the closing actions, so when you're thinking, looks like there's at least some overlap.
Yeah, so that question was, have I had a chance to read the governor's budget, and do I have thoughts on that? I think you will not be surprised to hear that I haven't done a deep dive into the governor's budget, but I'll tell you what, I think we'll do an availability on that in the next few weeks once we're able to take a look at it and get the crew on with you. Any other questions? Jonathan? I'll come back to you, Holly. No, Jonathan, go ahead.
Obviously, last session, we heard from Democrats that you guys didn't necessarily feel like you were being heard. Is there any reason to think that it's going to be different this session? Very similar breakdown between the two parties?
You know, that's a good question. I think that the personalities have changed, and I expect for a different culture in the House. We'll have to talk to Republican leadership. I agree that things didn't always go well, especially on the House floor, sometimes not in committee. We're going to be attentive to that. And our expectation is that our members are treated with respect and they're able to participate equitably for their constituents. Holly? Yeah, go ahead.
Jonathan, good question. And just as a follow-up to Kim's comments, I think good ideas speak for themselves. And when we bring forward good ideas, I believe that our counterparts on the other side of the aisle will embrace those, and hopefully we can work together to address some of the problems we talked about earlier. I think we're not alone in recognizing the problems that are out there, and hopefully together we can find those solutions that will have real bipartisan support. Thanks.
I'm curious, you're looking back at sessions past when big policies have moved through the Democrats as for like Medicaid expansion. That's one, even though you're going to argue you partner with some Republicans to create that majority. Is that sort of where you see your efforts being focused this session, or are you going to try to broaden reach out to Republicans across the border? How are you going to focusing your efforts to get the best people?
Another good question, Holly. I think, you know, those addressing how we work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is really situational. So I think it's going to vary issue by issue. I think in some cases we'll be able to reach bipartisan support on a broad level. In other cases, we're going to see certain members of the Republican caucus agree with us and vote with us. And I think it's going to really vary issue by issue. And but I have hope that that can happen. And likewise, we've got 16 independent minds in our Senate Democratic caucus, and at times they're going to agree with Republicans when some of us won't. And I think that's the way the process is supposed to work, and hopefully that's how it will play out in this session.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think that we know that there's a broad recognition of an affordable housing crisis. We understand that we need to pass a budget. I think on some of those big policy issues, we'll see in the first few weeks of the session who wants to provide solutions and who doesn't, and then hopefully get a working majority.
I'm wondering too, just looking at your four kind of priorities on the sign there, like Eric was saying earlier, some of that, addressing it different ways, but it's in the governor's budget, and obviously we haven't seen hospital to or programs are focused on it. But how do you sort of go about saying, okay, look, these are all things that we agree are problems. Here's how we get to something moving forward. How do you see that give and take?
In the past, it was really deep conversations over many months and significant compromises from both sides. And I assume that will be how we deliver policies this session. Medicaid was like that, infrastructure was like that, and budgets have been like that. So we anticipate, digging deep and making sure that policies work, making sure we're delivering for our communities, but we're willing to compromise if Republicans are willing to compromise.
I think the measure of where we land on reaching compromise on those issues, for example, depend on our assessment of whether they actually deliver for working Montanans. And I think that's going to continue to be our measure. And if they don't, we're going to call it out. And if they do, we'll move forward with them in partnership. But that is going to be the standard. So, for example, on past income tax cuts, we didn't see that as those cuts, particularly in the last session, as really benefiting working Montanans. It was benefiting the higher income brackets as opposed to those making more modest wages. And I think we can do better than that in revising our income tax code.
You referenced abortion as being something you expect to be this session. Is there legislation that you've seen already, either from members of your party that are looking to preserve access or policies from there, or things from the other side of the aisle that you're seeing about?
Yeah, we have bill draft. Our side, the Democrats have bill drafts in to address a broad spectrum of reproductive health care, up to and including protection for abortion care. From the other side, we've seen legislation for an all-out ban, and as you know, the Republicans have an all-out ban in their party platform. I don't.
So John Riley, Montanans Network.
Oh, great. Nice to meet you, John.
A lot of Democratic victories from the last legislative session were actually through the courts. Are you anticipating sort of a similar situation playing out for some of these, what you guys have described as more extreme measures?
Yes.
Something I'm curious about, this came up I was just in the House leadership elections, and there was, Representative Marlowe was talking about wanting to be for this session. I'm wondering if there's discussion among, I guess, both sides, both Senate and House Democrats, sort of about how are you going to go about articulating points? Are you looking to be standing up, having committees on the floor, pretty vocally articulating against what Republicans might be doing and agree with? Is it kind of more working in the back and smooth operating system on both sides or on the outside? Sort of wondering at this point how you guys are seeing handling that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and part of it will come down to how the culture of the Republican leadership plays out. I think that we know that we have to represent hundreds of thousands of Montanans, and we have to represent our shared values, and so we need to be vocal, and we need to make our points, and we only have 32 members in the House to do that, so we need to spread it out and do the best we can, and a lot of it will depend on, the example that Republican leadership sets.
In addition to what Kim said, I would just say all of the above. I think, we'll be standing up on the floor, we'll be standing up in committee, we'll be working with Republican members offline to try and influence policy, and hopefully that will be effective.
Do you have more? Shaylee, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. If, all right.
Sorry. Last session, I saw Republicans make concerted attacks on trans people, and you guys have members of the caucus now who are not suspended. Wondering what you've heard from Republican leadership teams on and lawmakers on any possible hostility and any possible accommodations. Like obviously it's definitely to the leadership.
Yeah, the safety and the ability for our members to participate equitably is our highest priority. We're in conversations with Republicans, both in leadership and not in leadership, about how we'll make sure that is the case. And we'll be really disappointed if Republicans in leadership in the House engage in any measures that would make our members unsafe or that would not allow full participation. We won't tolerate it.
Have some of those been floating around.
Yeah.
Sorry for the question. Last session, obviously, we had a lot of debate over rules around COVID-19. Moved on from that. But are there any protection moving pushing forward the rules for COVID-19 or any of those things?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Sorry. Any COVID-19 rules that you'll be pushing for? I know that was a big discussion last session. Are there any accommodations you're still hoping to see?
Yeah, and Pat can address this too. In Ledge Council, you probably saw that we eliminated a large portion of the COVID protocols from last session. We will allow remote participation. We'll allow remote participation in terms of testimony, and we'll allow remote participation for our members as long as they have permission from their caucus leadership. And I think, obviously, those rules aren't final, but that's our expectation. I don't know if you have.
The only thing I would add to that is I think if circumstances change, we'll adapt. And so if we need to take some measures, I think both Republican and Democratic leadership can work together to make that happen. We've had now the opportunity to go through at least one legislature and had that experience. I think we can really draw from that and take appropriate measures that we can all agree on. I don't think it'll be contentious at that point if we need to.
I had a question for Senator Weber.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask a little bit about the Native Caucus this session. I think it shrunk a little bit, not too much, sort of how you're feeling about going into this session, looking at priorities you want to focus on for that caucus, and anything that you're just looking at and want to make a priority.
Thank you for the question. The Indian caucus, we only lost one, Representative Pena, but the Indian caucus, we have some bills that we want to carry that really will affect Indian country or Indians within the state. So we are going to be meeting and getting those out. And most of our bills and our concerns kind of reflect what the Democratic Party is: the lack of housing, education. And then as Senator Flowers said, MMIW, that is still an issue within Indian country. We took a tour of the reservations on the State Tribal Relations Interim Committee, and every reservation, that was one of the subjects that came up, was MMIW, that we still have that crisis on every reservation. So we do have our own certain bills, but they do have the basis as the Democratic concerns as well.
I think if there aren't any more questions, we'll close out here. Look forward to working with you over the next couple of months and this session again. Thanks you guys for coming.